Uh, all right. Okay. Just to recap where we were holding. We've been talking all this time about the sefiros hagenuzos and various inyonim in the sefiros hagenuzos. What are the sefiros hagenuzos? These are, in technical jargon, these are the sefiros within Eser. But in a broader sense, Hasidus explains that these are the inyan of the sefiros in the Or Ein Sof, even before Hatzimtzum, even before the Tzimtzum, and Kolshka, after the Tzimtzum, but before there are actually any Kalim. The only inyan of Kalim starts already only in Olam HaAkudim, where there's only one Kli, there's not even 10 Kalim, there's only one Kli, Kulam Nichlolim B'Kli Echad. They're all the ohros are in one Kli. So you could ask the question, how could it be that you could have 10 ohros in one Kli? What divides the ohros into separate and different ohros? Why are there 10 ohros? Now, this is a subject that he didn't really address before, and I didn't emphasize it, but that's a very pertinent question over here. It's an important question. How come there can be Eser ohros when there's only one Kli? Isn't it the Kalim that makes the hischalkus, the divisions in the ohros? And the answer is no, that's not actually the case. It is not so that the hischalkus of the oyer, according to this shita anyway, is through the kalim. On the contrary, the hischalkus is in the ohros, and he explained to us in the last maima that the kalim are lefi ha-ohros. The kalim are lefi ha-ohros. In other words, meaning to say, let me just get my chat up just in case anyone wants to say something here. So the kalim are lefi the ohros, and therefore it's not that the ohros are magbil the kalim, it's that the kalim, is that the let me say that again. It's not that the kalim magbil the ohros, it's that the ohros choose their kalim that are suitable for them. You could say al derech moshel, and in fact, this is a moshel that is used constantly in Hasidus. The koyachas the nefesh, before they melubish in the guf, there's a koyach of the nefesh. Let's say the koyach hariyah, right? The koyach hariyah is melubash only in one kli, in a general sense. Yes, it's true that at the time of Matan Torah, they heard the koyach, they saw the sounds and they heard the visions, right? Shamus hakoila, shamus esanire, v'rao esanishma. That only happened in Matan Torah, but there are klal, the koyachas of the nefesh, the koyachas of the nefesh before when they're melubash in the guf, koyach hariyah is only melubash in the eye. It's not melubash in the oizen or in the hands or in the nose or anywhere else. Similarly with koyach harayach, it's only melubash in the nose and not in the eyes and ears and so on and so forth. So we see that really the kalim and the ohros are not the other way around, which is the way it's normally thought about. So this maima, he's going to develop this inyan to a greater extent. And this is the maima of Matos Masei. And Matos Masei is the main subject, well, at least one of the main subjects, probably the primary subject of Matos Masei, is the inyan of Nedorim. And of course, he's going to connect it to the inyan of Nedorim later. But Nedorim are, as most of the Maimorim in Ayin Beis, the beginning and the end of the Maimah were actually added later. They weren't part of the original Hemshech. It was written as an inyan of a Hemshech, and then it was divided into weeks. The Fi Parshas Shavua, and the beginning and end was added later on. So Lav Dafka, that the Iker focus of the Maimah is going to be on the first paragraph of the Maimah, in other words, on one of the psukim that he asks questions about, as we have probably become familiar with all the way along. In any event, the Maimah starts with Vaydaber Moshe el Roishe Matos Lifnei Yisrael. He speaks to the Roishe Matos, in other words, to the heads of the tribes, and he says as follows: Zeh hadavar asher tzivah Hashem. This is what Hashem commanded. Now, usually when you get the expression, this is what Hashem commanded, it usually comes after the command, and then the expression, this is what he commanded, goes on what it said before. In this particular case, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't say that. And only afterwards does he start to speak about the inyan of Nadarim. We have to understand that. And that's what he asks about. What is this inyan of Zetiva Hashem? You should have started off with the Nadarim and then said at the end, this is what Hashem commanded. Right? You should have laschil b'inyan Nadarim, ish kid or neder, etc., etc. That's how you should have started. What is this preface that before you even know what he's talking about? Is makdim tchila ze hadavar. It says first, this is the matter, this is the davar. And davar here is going to be a very important word in its own right, as we will see. Why was Parshas Nadarim said to the heads of the tribes, to the Nasiim? It should have been said to all of Bnei Yisrael, like all of the Torah. Isn't it true that the Torah was said to all of Bnei Yisrael? Why is Parshas Nadarim said to the Rosh Hamatos? There are various terutzim about this. One of the terutzim is that the Rosh Hamatos were generally the people that were sitting on the Beis Din, and therefore when it came to a shal about Nadarim and so on and so forth, or when it came to actually making Nadarim and making them al pidin and so on and so forth, that had to be done in front of the Beis Din. The Beis Din were witnesses, and therefore you could argue al pi pshat that that's why it was said in front of the Rosh Hamatos, but there are other explanations, and we will see the explanation that it brings later on. We have to first, in order to understand all of this, to be able to answer these questions, we have to first preface the explanation regarding the Eser sefiros. The Eser sefiros is chalkus maala umata. That in the Eser sefiros you have the concept of maala umata, higher and lower. Now we're going to find that when it says higher and lower, it actually means not just higher and lower sort of geographically, so to speak, not even higher and lower in madrega, but that the higher and lower comes about in madrega comes about because there's higher and lower in quality. It's actually a qualitative higher and lower and not a quantitative higher and lower, as we will see actually more in the next parak, but we'll see a little bit in this parak also. And he explains, why is it that they're higher and lower? Because the ohros are ohros pnimiyim, ohros makifim, there's no higher and lower. The very definition of makif is that there's no maala, no mata. But when it comes to ohros pnimiyim, there are chilukim between the oir that is closer to the makor, as he'll explain, and the oir that is further away from the makor, as we will see. They're clothed within the vessels. There's a limitation and a medida in the way they are drawn down. How the ohros are drawn down into the kalim and how they mizgala in the kalim. That they're not, all the ohros are not equal in the way they're drawn down. Now, interestingly enough, as you'll point out soon enough, this is not true of Olam HaToihu. In Olam HaToihu, there is no hischalkus maala umata, and all the ohros are equal. In other words, the power of the oir is all or atzmi in Olam HaToihu, but not in Olam HaTikun. In Olam HaTikun, there's an inyan of Seder Hadroga, and we'll see how the Seder Hadroga begins. It really begins with what's closer to the makor and what's further away from the makor. This is what he's going to explain. So here the parak is parak Lamed Zayin. What he means when it says maala umata, it's explained elsewhere. This is the inyan of ribui and miut, of more and less. Now, again, when he explains more and less, we're not going to win. We will see soon enough that we're not actually talking about quantity. We're talking about quality. And I'll give you just a peek into it now, if you think about it as follows. We say that chokhmah is mizgala kanakuda. And Bina is called Rechoyvois Hanahar. Bina is Mizgala B'Hizrachvus. So where's Ribu and where's Miut? The Choyre and Chochma is the Inyan of Miut, right? Whereas Masha Enkain Bina is the Inyan of Hizrachvus, Rechoyvois Hanahar. That's the Inyan of Bina, Hispashtus. But therefore you see that the Inyan of Ribu and Miut is lefi the quality and not lefi the quantity. It's not lefi the hispashtus, it's lefi the quality of the oil as it comes down. The higher the oil, the less it's mispashet to start off with. Therefore, when chokhmah is only a nakuda, masha enkein bina is already bezrachfus because it's more shaykh to the inyan of the hispashtus bechitzonius, as we'll see later on. The zemshim is maita or madrega lamadrega, and zeuchim mata. The fact that the ore is reduced from level to level and reduced in quality from level to level, as we'll see, this is the inyan of mata. Masha Enkain, where it's not reduced, that's the inyan of Myla. That's also the inyan of closer and further away. The bekiru meir or begilu yoiser. That where the oil is closer to its makor, therefore it's more begilui. The further away it is from the makor, the less or the weaker the gilui. The zeu riboy or gilui when it's closer to its source. The whole mashim is rachek, misalem mismaita, or the further it descends from its original makor, the more it becomes concealed and the more it becomes reduced. So therefore, obviously, since chokhmah is reishis chokhmah, the ohros chokhmah is going to be Myla, lagabe the ohros bina, which is going to be mata. He's going to explain this more by Richus. This is also true of the inyan of the kav. What's the kav again? The kav comes about after the tzimtzum arishoin. After the tzimtzum, the kav is nimshach into the chalal. Where's the kav nimshach from? The kav is actually nimshach from the or that was originally in the chalal and is then moved, so to speak, above the chalal. It's raised up to a higher level, a higher madrega than the chalal, or the chalal is reduced to a lower madrega than the or that was surrounding it. That or that is now surrounding the chalal is called the igul hagodol, and the kav comes from the igul hagodol. The kav is a hamshocha from the igul hagodol. Okay, how exactly that happens, since that's igul and that's igulim, that's yoshar, we'll have to discuss that another time, but that's the way it is. In any event, the hamshoch is a kav, maala mata in the kav, so the kav also has ma. The higher the kav is to the or in sof, in other words, the or that was in the halal and now surrounds the halal, the closer it is, that's called the Myla of the kav, the upper echelons of the kav. And the mata of the kav is as it gets nimshach into the chalal. Again, shezeu inyan kiru v'richu k'mo shechazu b'mavoy sharim, shar ala perek beis. Mavoy sharim is one of the svorim in Kisva Arizal, mavoy sharim, oitzes chayim, eitz chayim, all of those are more or less different compilations of the teachings of the Arizal. So that's mavoy sharim. V'hainu, the b'katzeu ha'elyoin, the top of the kav, or what's called Reishizakar, Shuhu b'chinas kiruv el makoira, it's close to the makor. There, meir shama or begilu yoise. That's where the or is much more begilui, where the or is much more powerful. It's not reduced to the same extent. In other words, it's a higher quality or. The further the kav is drawn down into the halal, and it becomes distance from its makor, or the or is reduced and becomes behelim. Similarly, you have in a gashmis sense, you have the or nair right close up to the nair. It's much more powerful than it is further away, even though you can see it from further away. But nevertheless, the oil is much dimmer the further away it is. Similarly, with an avuka, a big torch or whatever, right? Fire torch. Closer to it, it's much brighter. Or even though it's the same or, nevertheless, it's the further away you go, the more the or becomes reduced. So it's the same or atzmo, even though it's the same or. It becomes concealed and it becomes reduced. In the physical moshel of a nair, a candle or an avuka, a flame, big flame, bonfire or something like that, the or actually kind of disappears. In other words, at a certain point in time, you're not going to be able to see it anymore. It's kind of, you could say, I suppose, overcome by the darkness. You won't see it at a very great distance. But this is only in the Moshel Gashmi. The Moshel Gashmi, who shenichla or this is not true in Ruchnias. In Ruchnias, it go continue down in Shtalshalus, and it's still there, even though it might not. It might be behelem to some extent, and maybe it's mismayet to a large extent, and nevertheless, it's still there. Becomes more concealed, and that's the union of the reduction of the oil. And it's also, as it says in Eitz Chaim, the Chochma meir or in sof bekiruv makoy. In Chochma, the or in sof is bekiruv, ubebina berichuk makoy. Bezo derech chaloin, and zo that only as if via a window, as if, as you can see, if there's a window in your room and the sun shines through, it's only a beam of sun that comes through. The rest of the oil is remains outside. It's only a beam comes through the window, and that's like the or of Zeranpin. It's much reduced. It's like only a window, and the or of Malchus is even more reduced. It's the inyan of a nekev. The Malchus derech nekev, like a little hole, like a pinprick hole or whatever, a small hole. Obviously, a much smaller beam than even a window. And he's going to explain this a little bit more. The Chochma meir or begilu Eser in Chochma much more begilu. More derech Moshe Ba'askola says the sefiros Hari ben Nekudas Askola in the main Nekuda, the main concept of the Askola of Chochma meir or seichel begilu yor rav. There, when a person has the sudden inspiration and an idea comes to him or whatever it is, and it's that aha moment, and that the Askola is me'er b'chochma, he's away, he feels it. It's a tremendously exhilarating and dynamic experience to experience that nekudas ha'askola when a person suddenly has this new idea, because it's begilui b'ribuy or rav. Agam she'eno masiga dayin, even though he hasn't put it yet into oisius, he hasn't grasped it intellectually, he hasn't analyzed it yet. Agam she'eno masiga dayin es ha'inyan sichli eichu mahu. Mikom makom haru meir gam sham begilu b'yoser. In Chochma it's begilu b'yoser. Kasher baba hasog b'bina, when it comes into analysis, the analysis of bina and so on, hasoga mismayet ha'or, then the or is reduced. It has a much less powerful effect on the person than the oil in its original form in Chochma, its original inspirational sudden flash of insight. And even though it's true that when we talk about being masik something, grasping a concept or whatever, this is dafka in bina and not really in Chochma, because Chochma is Myla mihasoga. It doesn't come into all the categories of thought, and it's not analyzed into all its constituent parts and so on and so forth. The Chochma hagam shehi gam ken yediya mikom makom ein hasoga, it's not grasped properly in Chochma. It's light without oisius, so to speak. V'inyan hasoga hu bebina dafka, and that the hasoga comes in bina. Mikom makom b'Chochma hagilu hu bebina is or rav yoser. In Chochma, there's a much greater oyer, much more than it is in Bina, as we explained previously in that chapter 33. Nevertheless, even in Bina, although compared with Chochma it's much less, but nevertheless compared with the Midas and so on, Bebina Meira or Bizrach was the Moichin Bichlal. The Moichi Bichlal may by him a Gilu Or. Because in Moichi in general, there's a Gilui Or. Masha Enkain in the midos is only ha'ora. As he's going to explain, Masha Enkain bezo bezer anpin is the midos, right? There's the midos, the 6 midos of zer anpin, which is chesed gvura tiferes netzach yisoid. So those are the midos of zo, and that's the binyan of zo. Who derech chaloin, the aura that comes into zo is only via a window, so to speak. Shibichin is miut yoiser. It's a much smaller degree of illumination. Yes, there's illumination, but it's illumination that's drastically reduced from the way it is outside in the open air, so to speak. Like it is with the light of the sun, it shines on the entire area. The sunlight, when the sun shines, it shines on the entire area. But when it comes to inside the house, it only comes through the window. The walls prevent the oil from shining forth. Doesn't shine into the house unless you have glass walls, I suppose. It only comes in through what comes in through the window is the light that you're going to have. That obviously we understand that in general, the light outside is much greater than the light that's going to come through the window. And therefore Chazal says as follows: that an achsadra porch can be checked for chometz on Pesach, on Erev Pesach, by its own light. Why? In other words, you don't have to use a candle. Because there's a lot of light. And therefore you have to light a candle. You can't just use the light coming through the window. And similarly, if we understand that with Zer Anpin, when the light shines through a window, so to speak, or it's a reduction in the oil. And as for example, a psak din, the ruling that comes after the ganze arichos of the Gemara. Come on, there are Moshel psak din abala arichos apilpul become a tamim sefiros. The Gemara will bring a number of different tamim, a number of different sefiros, different opinions of different sages, and argue the various inyonim between them, and we'll come to a conclusion that this is the din. The psak is like the chachomim and not like Rabbi Meir. The psak is like Hillel and not like Shammai, whatever it is. Psak din, psak din, and in Nikarim atam vasforos, rak mashi poise kach v'kach. In the psak din, you don't see all of the reasons given and all of the sefiros for this particular psak, but only that this is the psak din. Of course, the meforshim on the Shulchan Aruch, for example, broaden our understanding by telling us what the reasoning is. The Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch does a marvelous job of explaining the tamim. But nevertheless, the ganze arichos apilpul, as it is in the Gemara, we don't find in the not even in the meforshim generally. In Shulchan Aruch, yes, you find it in the Torah to some extent, etc., but not everything, only a reduced amount. In any event, we understand the psak din is a tamtis of the halacha. Everything is there in the psak din. Shara psak din ba b'chol arichos apilpul mikol arichos apilpul. It results after. It's a result of the entire pilpul. You come to psak din, so therefore it must contain everything within it, although we don't see it. We don't see them in a visible sense. And similarly with the Indian of the Mishnah. Time was forest with pupil godel. The Mishnah is derech katzara. It's mamish a tremendous abbreviation of all the discussion that the Chachomim had. Rabbi Yehuda Anossi wrote down the Mishnah. He wrote it down b'derech katzara. In other words, he wrote it down in such a way that you can unpack the entire pilpul from it, and that's what the Gemara does. The Gemara really reconstructs the entire pupil that came before the Mishnah, it now reconstructs it after the Mishnah. And then afterwards, we get the Psak Halacha, which again, if we examine the Psak Halacha and the Diyukim in the Psak Halacha, we can come to a lot of the sefiros in the Inyonim and the understanding that there was in the pupil beforehand. In any event, in the Gemara, it is once again broadened into arguments, discussions, etc. From the brief statement of the Mishnah, in its very brief statement, Yodea hu es hakol, es kol ha'arichus ba'Mishnah. Es kol ha'arichus. He understands the entire arichus of the Mishnah. Ba'Mishnah hu behelam, but in the Mishnah this is behelam. Only a great chochem that can unpack it in that way. And like the Psak Din is that the sukkah which is higher than 20 amas high is possible. Why? There's reasons for it. There's a number of different reasons. One reason that's given is they were higher than 20 amas. You're not, the shade of the schach is not what shades you. It's the shade of the walls already. Because once the sukkah is a certain height, it's the walls that are giving you the shade and not the schach. Okay, that's one svara that's given. Or mishum de lo shalta ba'eno, or because you don't see the schach. And one of the inyan and one of the inyonim in sukkah is laman yedu doresechen ki betsukois hoishafte es bnei Yisrael. There has to be the inyan of yediyah. You have to know that you're sitting under the schach. And if it's too high up, you can kind of forget about it. There's all kinds of difference in Yonim over there. It's all in the Mishnah, but it's in a concealed way. And this is exactly the same as the concept that we were speaking about before of the muta or. In other words, the way the oir is in the Mishnah is a much higher quality oir because it contains everything. The way it is in the Gemara is when the Gemara unpacks it, ba'arichus, just like Bina unpacks Chochmah, so to speak. It's not mehr begilui bechitzonius. It's a much higher form of oil and therefore much less accessible to the average individual. What's revealed is only a little bit of the oil because it's on a much higher madrega, and therefore what can be revealed of it is only a mute. Similarly with moichin and midas. Shamidas is mute or v'hagiloi legabai moichin. The moichin is on a higher madrega of giloi, as we know, in most people anyway. The kmobi is boinus b'inyan eloki, as when a person is misboinan on an inyan, on some concept, that arouses his Abba and Yira. Now, it doesn't work the other way around. Abba and Yira doesnn't give him an understanding and his boinanus in Elokus. But from understanding from Havon of Hasoga of an Inyan through his boinanus and so on and so forth, Abba and Yira is misoyer. It's only a little bit that shines through from the moichin to the midos. Unless a person has mamish gadlus hamoichin ad kedei kach, we talk about the greatest tzaddikim, Moshe Rabbeinu, and so on. Va'orem hamoichin behechesh yeh b'midos b'hamidos, and ha'or of the moichin, it's absolutely necessary that it'll be in the midos. Sheh b'midos dim lav kein lo yeh his is a midos, because otherwise a person's going to be just like a lump of clay. He's not going to be misoyer. He's not going to have the midas. The midas of Av and Yira are not going to be aroused at all. It has to come through moichin. It has the whole his boinanus in it. Is mute, or it's only a much reduced form of the oil that was originally in moichin. Myla. And so too, it is in the Nimshal. All we've been talking about now is the Moshal in the Nimshal, the Myla Babina, Meira or Bizrachvus, Bezor, Rak Derechaloin, miuta or v'malchus ha'or b'derech nekev bilvad. Right, and in malchus it's only a nekev. It's only a tiny little pinprick of a hole, and a small, small amount of light shines through. Like for example, when a person's megale his midos in dibur. Now, when a person's megale his midos in dibur, you know what his midos. You can understand the midos. Let's say the midah of kas, which is much easier to understand, because you hear the kas in his voice. You can hear the anger. But the anger in his voice is nothing like the anger that's in his heart. Obviously, the anger in his midos is much more powerful than the anger that he can express in his voice. And therefore, when a person is extremely emotional, he can't speak. His voice shuts down. As we know with people who are psychotic, they have these psychotic anger episodes. Sometimes they just they can't speak. That kind of thing. It's impossible for them to express themselves. Okay, so a person speaking words of love, or the love is the cause of his speech, etc. Because of the love he's speaking. He's speaking to whoever it is that he's talking to. You can hear the love in his voice. Because sin is the opposite of expression. When a person feels love, he wants to express the love. When a person feels hatred, he doesn't want to talk to the person who he feels hatred towards. And in fact, there's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin, which he quotes now. I think the Mishnah is on Mishnah in Sanhedrin. I think it's Chof Zayin, Ayin Beis, I think it is. But in any event, the Mishnah says as follows: the more Eser soine, who is called a soine, someone who hates, someone who didn't speak to him for 3 days. This is talking about the mitzvah of edus, giving testimony against somebody. Are you allowed to give a testimony against somebody if they hate you? If the person hates the person is giving testimony against, is he allowed to actually give testimony? Because he's a soiner, and it's going to color his edus. The Mishnah there concludes that Bnei Israel enam chashudim al zeh. Bnei Israel aren't suspect of letting their emotions cloud their ability to transmit honest edus. But I'm not sure that that's the psak din. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not the psak din, because we know that emotions have a tremendous part to play in people's testimony, and that's what the lawyers often pick apart. As far as I'm aware, never having been in court, I don't really know, but that's what I understand from kind of the movie situation of courtrooms. In any event, it's only a radiance of the midah. What can be expressed in speech is only a radiance of the midah, but not etzem midah. The truth is that in nigunim, when it's really heartily and heartily nigunim, the nigunim can express much more than speech. But the reason for that is because a nigun is dafka, not words, right? It's not words. You can express in words fully the feelings that you have in your heart. But in song, to a certain extent, one can, right? One can express certainly much more than you can express in words, if not the entire midah. In any event, v'araya, what's the proof? When a person is in a state of tremendous arousal, emotion, emotional arousal, he can't speak. When a person gets very, very angry, like really angry, psychotically angry, then they can't speak. And also when a person gets very emotional, perhaps with love or with sadness or whatever, it's very hard to speak. Come out in cry and so on, but not in words. Only when the midah comes into timtum, then the person can speak. And this is only therefore a radiance of the midah, not the etzem midah. And how much more so, of course, the malchus. It's only a pinprick. And this is the inyan, this is the concept of maala umata and sefiros, higher and lower. What's closer to the source, what's further away from the source. What's higher in quality, but not necessarily in quantity, is chokhmah, and what's lower in quality and quantity is bina, midos, and malchus. So that's maala umata sefiros. The bechinas riboy haor bechinas Myla. The riboy, and again riboy, riboy doesn't mean necessarily quantity, but rather quality. No miut haor hu bechinas mata. All kind of chokhmah hu bechinas Myla legabe habina. That's why chokhmah is on a higher madrega than bina. Because in chokhmah the oil is of a higher quality, and therefore it's meir beriboy on a higher level. It's meir on a higher level. And then similarly with the moichin, higher than the midos. When the oil is equal in all of the sefiros, even though even though there are still different sefiros, we're talking about in olam hatoihu over here. This is ora chokma, sorry, ora chesed, and that's ora gvura in toihu. They are mechulakim in the sense of what it is that they do, but nevertheless, the intensity of chesed and the intensity of gvura in toihu is equal. The intensity is equal. In other words, the quality is equal. Who in your rosh for sof? I'm not sure what he means here, but who in your rosh for sof? Since the oil in toihu is all equal, therefore there is no inyan of rosh for sof. If they were mechulokim in the madregas, that this is a higher madrega because there's more oil, or because there's a higher level of oil and that's a lower level, then you have a hierarchy. Then you have hadroga. But when there's no hadroga, when there's no rosh v'sof, that's olam hatoyu. And ein zev v'chinas maala umata, you don't have the inyan of maala umata, you don't have the inyan of rosh v'sof in olam hatoyu. Mobi is galas koiches atzmim, and similarly when you have koiches atzmim in the nefesh, when they reveal koiches atzmim, in other words, the koich atzmi of the nefesh, ahava atzmis of the nefesh, yira atzmis of the nefesh. Hagam shahamoichin be'etzem heim madrega elyonim hamidas, even though moichin is essentially higher than the midas, nevertheless, if a midah becomes revealed in its atzmi state, in its essential state, then mikoma we'll see ma'achsha or hanefesh me'ibahim b'shaveh ein ze b'chinas maala umata. You won't have the inyan of maala umata. Even in the midos, they'll be all equal, which is only happens really by a tzaddik. Similarly, it is the inyan l'mayla kamo bo'olam hatoihu shelo haya b'chinas maala umata kamo shekazu b'makom acher. You didn't have the inyan of maala umata. Why? Because all of the ohros, even though there were different kinds of ohros, this was a blue or that was a green or, so to speak, or a blue or a red or whatever you want to say it. In other words, there were ohros mechulakim. This is the or of chesed and this is the or of gvura. But nevertheless, the intensity of the or was the same in all of them, and therefore there was no maala umata, and that's why it fell apart. It couldn't. There was no seder, and that's the inyan olam hatoihu. All right, Kitzer. In a maala umata hu inyan ribu umiut. And again, ribu umiut doesn't mean quantitatively, means qualitatively. Basiba sam hu akiru v'arichuk. The ribu or v'agilu because Myla. The more the oil in quality, the higher it is. V'helem v'amiut ha'or hu because mata. And the more concealed the oil is, the more it's shaykh to the inyan of mata. And therefore chokhmah is on a higher madrega, the bina, as you have in the essence, the essential point of the haskola, the or is beriboy, ubahasoga mizmahet umisalem or. And in order to be able to explain that, to bring that into Gilui in Bina, so you need reams and reams and pages and pages and pages of explanation in order to, and as it is in Chochma, it's like a garin, it's a seed which transcends all the his galus in oisius, etc., etc. It's more of an awareness of the emes of the thing rather than an awareness of the meaning of it per se. In any event, we'll get into that. He's going to explain it more. Right? It's more bizrachfus in Bina than it is in the midos. The midos means ma'et yoiser more b'psakdin, as we saw with the example of psakdin, more b'mishnah, and similarly with the mishnah. Everything is there in the mishnah. Everything is there in the psakdin. The ganze arichus is a pupil. Shekol arichus hu behelem, but it's behelem over there. Ubedibur gam hamidos hain behelem. And in Dibur, the midos are also in a state of helem. Even the midos are in a state of helem in Dibur. The koiches atzmiyim, but when you're talking about essential koiches of the nefesh itself, she'orbe mashave hagam shem b'chinas rosh v'sof, even though they do have the in and rosh v'sof, because how do they have the in and rosh v'sof over there? Because the inyan of chesed comes before gvura, right? Even though they're equal in terms of their intensity, but chesed is mizgala before gvura is mizgala. Nevertheless, they don't have this quality of maala mata, the sefiros to tell you, and that's the situation with the sefiros to tell you that there's no inyan of maala mata, and therefore that was the cause of the whole collapse. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, we're back on track, folks. We will start with Perek Lamed Ches next week. Are there any questions?
Question, Myla. So if we can distinguish between different ohros, that means that there is something there which is different. Otherwise, we cannot, we say there's only one ohros. So,
right.
And how is this distinction, where does it exist if it's not in the kelim? It might be not the kelim of the ohros, but it should be kelim at some higher level. What is, it means question. That there is something there, some limitations that allows us to distinguish.
Right. The point that he's making here is that it's not necessarily the kelim. Those distinctions are already in the or itself. How? Because that's the inner of the Eser sefiros hagenuzos. That's the medida, the measuring out of the ohros. What does it mean, medida to ohros? It's basically a medida in the intensity of the ohros. That the higher, the more intense the or, the higher it is, the less intense it is, the lower it is. And that's an inyan that before you even get to the kelim, you have a hierarchy of ohros. You have a hierarchy of ohros.
But where does this hierarchy come from? So
that comes from the kav. It comes from the kav because the Reishizakar is touching the or ein sof, so to speak. Masha'inka in the sofa kav, especially where it goes into the halal or the hemshech hakav, hamshochet hakav, that is not. It's further away from the makor, and therefore it's on a lower madrega.
So it's an intrinsic quality of or, not of kelim, not extrinsic.
Yeah, according to this shita that the Rebbe is explaining now. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions, Raboisai, Vitai? No. All right. We'll call it a day. Okay. Shkoyach. We'll see you next week, Mitzvah Hashem.
Thank you. Mitzvah Hashem.